Setbacks and breakthroughs. Why feeling stuck might mean you are on the brink. There's a mighty sugar maple on our farm that predates the American Civil War. Planted on our farm over 200 years ago, this tree recently endured a fierce ice storm that broke its massive trunk, leaving behind the stark standing snag, as they call it, and fallen segment that was pictured in a photo that I recently shared inside the Digital Contrarian. And to be honest, I felt a pang of sadness, realizing that this majestic tree is now closer to its end than its beginning. But reflecting on its resilience and recent challenges in my own life, it led me to explore the nature of setbacks and breakthroughs this past week. And it raised a powerful question. What if our greatest setbacks are actually seeds for our most meaningful breakthroughs? Which takes us to when nature laughs at your plans and what to do when it does. Look, there's nothing quite as humbling as farming. You can have detailed plans, schedules, preparations, but if the weather doesn't cooperate, you are completely at its mercy. And farming is a powerful reminder that we control far less than we like to believe. Take our recent experience, for example. We've endured 11 straight weekends of relentless rain here in Vermont. And with each passing weekend, I felt further and further behind on establishing our production garden this season. But then this past Sunday, we finally had our first sunny weekend day in nearly 3 months. And Tylene and I, and the boys, along with Blue, took full advantage of this opportunity. Blue often sits in my lap on the tractor, and I like to say, move over toddlers and tiaras, introducing tractors and chihuahuas, which I firmly believe could be TLC's next big hit. Then this past week brought a much-needed 3-day stretch of sunshine, allowing us to plant 200 feet of alliums, including onions, shallots, and chives. Plant 200 feet of cucurbits, summer squash, zucchini, delicatas, butternuts, and spaghetti squashes. Plant over 100 feet of brassicas, including broccoli, cabbage, and kohlrabi. Sow 100 feet of carrots. Install 500 feet of electric netting to protect our kitchen garden and the greens that have been getting nibbled by the deer and rabbits. In other words, after weeks and weeks of being stalled, the burst of sunshine brought with it an explosion of breakthroughs on the farm. Early in life, I was introduced to the work of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, particularly his concept of flow and the idea that the secret of life is to detach yourself from the outcome and focus deeply instead on the process. Farming embodies this principle perfectly because, like entrepreneurship, farming requires an immutable faith that the next sunny day, i.e. your next breakthrough, is just around the corner. Like our one-eyed barn cat Carlito, enjoying a few moments of sunshine in between rain showers while napping on our compost station, confident that there are sunny days ahead. And one contrarian observation that I made both in my own life and in the lives of my private clients as their strategic advisor and confidant in many ways is the following. Breakthroughs often tend to cluster after prolonged setbacks. Now, knowing that every breakthrough first germinates from the seed of a setback has helped me learn to take setbacks in stride. And sometimes when I'm particularly mindful, I'll welcome my next setback because I've learned that hidden inside the most frustrating delays is often the beginning of something new and special. But that raises a deeper question. What does it actually look like to find a breakthrough inside the setback itself? And is it really possible to use adversity as a fuel in the moment and not just retrospectively in hindsight? Well, I'm going to leave you here with one of 3 of our questions that we'll be exploring here today for reflection. And that is, what's one small action that you can take today to be ready when your next breakthrough opportunity in your life or in your business presents itself? Which takes us to the injury that gave me my garden back. Look, there's something about minor injuries that forces a reset in your life. Last week, for example, I strained my calf playing pickleball, grade 1 strain. I can walk, but I just can't put fast, intense pressure on that leg right now. And it came at a really frustrating time because one of my goals this summer is to hit an official 4.0 rating at my local club. I'm very close. In fact, I just declared that goal to an accountability group that I'm part of, and now, unfortunately, it's likely going to have to wait. Now, normally I play pickleball in the morning several times a week after dropping the boys off at school, but suddenly those 90-minute sessions were wiped completely off my calendar. And right at the same time, the weather finally shifted from rain to sunshine. So instead of having to choose between two opposing commitments to either train on the court indoors or spend that time outside on the farm, the choice was made for me. And in that open space, something shifted. With the rain finally gone and my leg out of commission, the garden became the obvious place to be. Like, for example, planting this row of Passat Cabbage Patch Kids, as I call them, making their way into the world. Until then, there hadn't been much to do outside, so my early mornings went to the court and in the gym. But now the decision was made for me. And with the shift in weather, it couldn't have come at a better time because it meant I could be productive on the farm while also giving my calf time to heal. And what looked like a limitation turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because that's the thing about setbacks. Setbacks in one area often create space for breakthroughs somewhere else in your life. Which takes us to our second of three questions here today, and that's this. What part of your life or work has been quietly calling for attention, but which keeps getting pushed aside? But the most surprising breakthrough of this past week wasn't physical at all. It came in a place that I've been struggling with for months, which takes us to when the breakthrough shows up on the page. For months now, I've been circling the same creative block. And a few weeks ago, my forthcoming book, The Return to Real, the one that I've been writing, reworking, and wrestling with, has started to feel more like resistance than flow. Now, look, I had moments of progress, but they sort of came in fits and starts. I'd write a section only to scrap it the next morning. A structure would start to feel like it just didn't make sense. It was solid until it wasn't. And the reality was that I was stuck. And no amount of outlining, whiteboarding, or walking around the pasture seemed to change that. But then, almost without warning, something shifted. These last few weeks, writing the Digital Contrarian each week has acted as a kind of forcing function. And within that rhythm, things finally started to click. For example, issue number 46, Brace for Impact, gave words to the three converging forces reshaping our world as we know it. Issue number 49, Why Oxytocin is the New Dopamine, gave us the science behind why so many of us are feeling what we're feeling right now in the world. One insight led to another. And then, this week, came a conversation with John Berghoff, a call with Carrie Jack, and finally, a live session that I hosted with Simon Bowen for private clients of mine and members of my Strategic Advisory Group Mastermind that gave me the language and a visual model for something that I've been trying to articulate for months. And suddenly, all the threads began weaving together, the philosophical, the practical, the personal. I could see the book again, not as a loose set of ideas, but as a unified thesis with a clear path forward. The breakthrough wasn't loud or dramatic, and it didn't come with a spark of genius or a burst of energy. It came from consistency, from structure, from surrendering the need to force it. Because sometimes breakthroughs simply come from showing up steadily. Which brings me to an invitation. In a few weeks, I'll be ready to share the updated draft table of contents from my forthcoming book. And it's changed significantly since I first asked for feedback a few months ago. And I would love your input, because the way this book is shaping up has been influenced by many of the insights, the stories, and the reflections that you've shared in response to my newsletters each week. So if you're interested, please keep your eyes peeled for that opportunity. Oh, and by the way, if you've responded to one of my emails over the last few weeks and you haven't heard from me, I am still catching up on replies. I love receiving your messages. It just takes me a little bit of time to reply. So thank you for your patience. Before we go any further, let me first share the unexpected lesson that this breakthrough revealed, because there's a strange thing about breakthroughs. Even when they happen, they rarely arrive alone. Often they bring a trail of scientific breadcrumbs in their wake, insights that help explain why adversity seems to work this way in the first place. Which takes us to our third question to reflect upon here today, which is, where in your life are you pushing for progress when what you may need most is simply to just keep showing up? This brings us to the science behind why setbacks work. Now, earlier I mentioned Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow, the idea that fulfillment often comes not from chasing outcomes, but from immersing ourselves in process. But what does the rest of literature say about the relationship between setbacks and breakthroughs? Well, as it turns out, quite a bit. Like, for example, in 2010, a team of researchers led by Dr. Mark Seary published a study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology that examined how people respond to adversity. And what they found was fascinating. Individuals who had faced some adversity in life, not none, not overwhelming amounts, but moderate, manageable levels, demonstrated greater resilience, better stress tolerance, and higher overall well-being than those who had faced either extreme. So in other words, as we explored in issue 35 of the Digital Contrarian, why the struggle is the solution, some struggle makes you stronger, but too much can break you, and none at all can leave you fragile. And by the way, we'll make sure that we link to each of the issues referenced in this piece, so that way you can dive deeper into the original writing if you have any interest. The question, of course, is what is the right amount of adversity? Because this supports a phenomenon known in psychology as post-traumatic growth, a concept developed by Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, wherein their research shows that many people don't just bounce back from adversity, they actually bounce forward. In other words, they develop deeper empathy, stronger relationships, clearer priorities, and they develop more durable inner frameworks. And then there's what neuroscientists are finding in the field of creativity. Periods of frustration and creative block often precede moments of insight. In fact, some researchers argue that the brain requires downtime, ambiguity, and even a sense of failure to reorganize its ideas into a breakthrough pattern, which, if you zoom out, sounds a lot like farming. Like, for example, when one of our Randall lineback heifers, like Athena, whom I've spoken about here before, watches me closely as I prepare to move her fence with an air of skepticism and maybe even a bit of cynicism. Look, you don't get growth without some kind of friction in life. Seeds need pressure, roots need resistance, and sometimes the best thing that you can do is give it time. But if all of this is true, if setbacks really are necessary for growth, then it raises an even harder question, which is, what do we do when the setback feels like too much? Or worse, when it asks us to walk away from something that we've built? Because after all, like with Lego, sometimes we need to break what we've built in order to build something better. As I wrap this up, I keep coming back to that tree. That 200-year-old maple has seen more seasons, more storms, more quiet recoveries than any of us ever will. And while it's nearing the end of its life, it's still standing. And there's something about that, because setbacks are often like that too. They look like breaks, but often they're actually an opening to what's next. So if you're in the middle of one right now, whether it's a delay, a derailment, or just a weird liminal space that you might find yourself in, I hope that this week's newsletter offers a helpful, albeit contrarian perspective for you to consider. Because while setbacks don't always feel fun when you're in them, they often mean that that breakthrough that you're looking for is right around the corner. Okay, I'll leave you with that for now. Remember to hug the ones that you love. And if you enjoyed this video, or if it's helped make you think, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to be notified for when the next video drops. And in the meantime, I actually have another video that I think you might enjoy that goes deeper into some of the ideas that we explored together in this piece. Until next week, I look forward to seeing you again sometime soon.